I'm Duncan Heath. I'm a conversion strategist here at Fresh Egg, and this training is going to cover some of the fundamentals of running a CRO campaign, but also cover some of the more advanced elements that aren't talked about so frequently. In this, our second video of our CRO training series, we're going to be talking about qualitative analysis. Quantitative analysis might tell you the what is happening and where, but it's really only qualitative analysis that can tell you the why. It adds context and texture to insights and helps explain what people in the real world are facing, the problems they're facing. It also helps us develop some solutions, so we identify what the opportunity or issue is, but qualitative research start to form the beginning of the solutions to those problems. There are numerous forms of qualitative research. What we're going to focus on today are three. So three of the most widely used, I'd say: user testing and recording, customer support team interviews, and heuristic assessment. And under heuristic assessment, we incorporate what's called immersive research, which we'll get to later. Stakeholder and customer service team interviews. One of the richest sources of information available about a website and its performance often comes from stakeholders at a company, and also the customer service teams that deal with customers on a daily basis. And there's a strong chance if they haven't experienced the problems themselves, they will have direct reports into them to understand what the biggest challenges for users are. And often things like call centre operatives, customer complaint teams, owner managers will have had that feedback to them at some point. There's some really key things to get right when doing interviews of stakeholders and customer service teams. The first being to identify the right people. So if you're trying to solve specific challenges and trying to understand certain areas of a site, you want to ask the people who've had exposure to those or have the right knowledge. So you want to create a list of the people that you think are the right people to interview, and then run that past the client to get their input into that as well. Ask them nicely. I mean, everyone has got time constraints, and often they won't see necessarily the direct value of you asking them questions about the users. Hopefully some will, but it's not always the case. So ask them nicely, and showing them what the value of those insights are and how that's going to make their lives easier ultimately, it can be a good place to start. Be prepared, so design the questions first, and we'll get onto that in a second. But also understand where the interviews are going to take place, how long they're going to last, and in what format they're going to take. So is it a simple one-to-one, or is it more a workshop style interview? That stuff's important to know up front. Consider recording the interviews either on video or at least audio, so that you can play back the responses later on and get better understanding of what was said, as opposed to just writing stuff down, because often the detail gets missed that way. When you're analysing the results, what you're really looking for are common themes. So there are inevitably going to be myriad different insights given by customer service representatives or stakeholders. I think what you're really looking for are those elements that get flagged up time and time again as issues or opportunities, because they're the ones to focus on first. So here are some good questions to ask when you're running interviews. And the questions really focus on identifying different audience groups, different user groups who might be visiting the website, but also their needs and their fears. Understanding these things can really help you when you come to develop solutions that effectively aim to solve their fears or play to their needs. They also the questions here start to extract some of those ideas from improving the user experience. You have to take every suggestion that you get from interviews with a pinch of salt. People can sometimes suggest things that make their lives easier rather than a customer's life easier. So again, bear that in mind, but typically they usually have really good ideas about how to improve a user's site experience. Moving on to immersive research, this is where you either try and become the company or become the customer to understand the challenges of both. The first, becoming the customer, we term dog fooding, and it's basically acting as if you are trying to buy the product or the service that the company is trying to offer. This actually, believe it or not, is a real person's job of actually testing dog food. They get paid a salary of around £50,000 a year. Crazy to believe as it is, but the idea behind it is to say, well, you can't get direct feedback of quality and enjoyment from dogs, So actually having a human taste the food, you can add an element of research and insight to that. But dog fooding, as an example of an e-commerce site, might be buying or going to a site to research a washing machine, understanding what the pros and cons of each washing machine are, trying to find the right one for you, looking at reviews, this kind of thing, then actually going through the purchase process online, trying to organise delivery dates, getting the product delivered and when you're in or at a different time of day. And then how easy is it to unpack the product, to get it installed, to activate a warranty, and then what about returning a product? So if you're not quite happy with it, is it an easy process to send that back, to get it picked up? Now, often when we analyse a site, we go to a level of research and we tend to look at the experience on the website and how easy it is to buy, but that ignores the bigger user journey and the importance of post-purchase behaviour and experience, which we know can have a massive impact on advocacy and also repeat purchases. So doing that dog fooding process where you go through the whole start to finish can give a real insight into where the key friction points are. So the second form of immersive research that we're going to focus on is what we call blue coating. So this is either becoming the employee or becoming the company, and trying to understand the challenges that customers face when they approach you. So a good example of this might be spending some time in a high street store of that company, or it might be spending some time in a customer service team office to listen to some of the challenges firsthand. We actually did this for Vodafone, where we spent some time in one of their Sydney stores, and we shadowed one of their customer service representatives as they were dealing with questions from customers. And what we found was some really interesting insights around the needs of users and their concerns that were directly transferable to the web experience. The same questions they were asking about phones and contracts were the very same things that they wanted to know when they visited the site. So this was a great source of information for us. Okay, moving on to user testing. Broadly speaking, two forms of user testing. There's in-person moderated testing, so live user testing this is often called, or remote testing. So this is where it's done not face-to-face, but over an internet connection, and users can be located around the world. Both of those have pros and cons, which we'll investigate now. So in-person user testing, you have the ability to pick up on very subtle body language. There's numerous studies that suggest that around 60-70% of all communication is non-verbal, and this stuff can be really interesting to understand where people are struggling with certain tasks on a website, or where they find something particularly interesting. It's easier to prompt a participant and elicit additional feedback, especially if you're doing unmoderated remote testing. It can be tricky to get additional insights where you see someone going down a pathway that could be useful to investigate further. When it's face-to-face, if you see someone struggling with a certain element of a website or wanting to go down a certain path, you can either encourage or discourage that depending on what you're trying to find out on a site. There's lower risk of tech failure. If you're face-to-face in a room, you can tend to adapt, and if a certain recording software doesn't work, you can restart it. Whereas remote, you can sometimes have some problems where you get a whole screen recording and a user test completed, but then you realise the audio is not quite correct and you have to redo the whole thing from the start. Some benefits of remote user testing: participants are generally more in a natural environment for themselves, so they might be in their living room with the lighting as they would normally have it, they might be relaxing on a sofa, they're using their own device typically, so it better represents what a typical user experience is going to be on your site, as opposed to a user testing lab, which, although you try and make it comfortable for them, they typically feel like they are under some sort of observation and can be using a computer they're not comfortable with, in a lighting situation they're not normally in. So having a representative experience for a user in their own setting can elicit some better results sometimes. Related to that, you can typically get some more candid feedback when you're doing remote user testing. Participants don't feel as much that they need to please a moderator if it's remotely done, and they will give more critical feedback, typically in our experience. There are lots of things you can do to help that in a live setting, but if someone doesn't feel that they are having to please another person in the room, then you can get good feedback that way. And tests, of course, typically are cheaper to run when they're done remotely. So there's no travel costs involved. You can typically source people quicker and easier than you can getting them into a physical location. So the cost and speed tend to be better. Through user testing, we're trying to effectively find, as this diagram illustrates, what users actually do on a site as opposed to what you think they do or what they are going to tell you that they do. And there's some overlap, and you typically get an understanding of your users, but believe it or not, when you start to test them, you can see that their behaviour is far removed from what you believe your preconceptions are around how they're using your site. Some tips around running user testing that I'll go through. One is to make sure there's a clear goal in mind when you're running the testing. So what are you trying to find out? And what areas of a site are you trying to analyse? Making it too broad can get very ambiguous feedback from your user testers. So whilst not wanting to funnel them too narrowly and getting them to do exactly the behaviours you're looking for, having a focus can be really effective. Be careful when using leading language when you're setting tasks or moderating live especially. So when you're asking them to locate a certain product, let's say, don't use terminology like can you search for X, because that suggests there's a search function available and it might lead them to use that as opposed to their natural behaviour, which might be far more navigational. When you're moderating, don't jump in, and this can be either live or remote moderated testing. Don't feel the need to quickly solve a user challenge for them. You will do eventually if they take too long doing it. But the responses that they have when they counter a challenge can be some of the most interesting insights that you get. They can't find a certain product. How do they go about solving that? Do they then look for a search function, or do they look for an FAQ section? Those can be the biggest insights, and if you jump in too quickly and prompt them in a certain direction, you lose those. Questions need to be really clear, and especially when this is unmoderated, because you don't get a chance to clarify with unmoderated testing. So if you're running a user testing video, for example, remotely, be very specific about what you're asking a user to do and the kind of feedback that you're looking for as they're doing it. Demographics are really important when it comes to user testing. So you don't just want to have a very, very broad group if that group is not really representative of your customers or your target customers. So some ways in which you can target users: you can target them by gender. If your product is very female-centric, for example, you might want to skew your user testers towards a female demographic. Location, age, device, and income, all very important elements that can help you identify those users with the conditions that match those of your target audience. You're going to get insights from them rather than someone who doesn't have an interest in your product or isn't really suited to your product or service. So some key takeaways from this qualitative session are that qualitative research is really important for adding that texture and context to issues and opportunities a user might be facing above the what and the where that you might get from quantitative. You get the why and the detail from the qualitative. There are many forms of research that fall into that qualitative bucket, all very, very important and have their place, 3 of which we've covered today, but there are many more. And you should be looking for insights that are identifiable through numerous forms of qualitative research, and they get flagged up time and time again, as these are the ones that typically are the most powerful and most useful when it comes to developing solutions.